Any more questions from students? Yes.
I was wondering, what has been the change in during your time in Congress in terms of its role and its ability to choose its political priorities and what issues it wants to address? I think that a lot of people believe that global warming has been set off because there is an imbalance in the media and how it's portrayed, whether it's real or not. But how does Congress fit into that system of finding what is an issue that matters, whether Americans believe it matters or not?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And in this instance, the people are ahead of the Congress, as I find is often the case when we're dealing with sensitive environmental issues. And let me tell you exactly why I think that happens. If I had suggested to you just a couple of years ago, not 20 years ago, a couple of years ago, that Americans in shopping malls all over America were going to cineplexes and paying $8 to $10 to see a movie starring Al Gore called An Inconvenient Truth, you would say, you crazy? And the whole movie's about global climate change. That's exactly what's happening in America. If I suggested to you just a short while ago that Newsweek cover story, the greening of America, not because of any action for Congress, but all over America, people are saying, you know, this is a fragile environment, pretty darn important that we protect it, and we better do something about it. And we've got a lot of activists out there, Natural Resources Defense Council, we've got Defenders of Wildlife, and all these organizations who are communicating with their members, and their members are starting to communicate with us. And so we're hearing from back home, do something about all of this. I mean, I didn't get involved in my early fight on acid rain way back when I first campaigned, because I sat down after reading 48 books and going to 37 lectures and decided that acid rain was a problem. I got involved because I am a kid, grew up in a second floor apartment in the inner city of Utica, New York, but I was going to campaign for Congress, and I was leaving my post as county executive. The guy who I designated to succeed me was a great outdoorsman, hunter, fisherman. He came in to me one day, he says, you know, as you're developing your platform, you better do something about acid rain. I said, well, tell me about what the acid rain really is all about. Well, this guy said, do you realize all those wonderful lakes you see when you drive north into the Adirondacks? And incidentally, acid rain came into our lexicon because of what was happening in the Adirondacks. He said, a lot of those lakes are dead. Fish can't live in them. I said, nah, yeah, I don't believe that. He said, I'm telling you. And so I did a little research and found out that of those 3,000 lakes, over 500 of them were dead, and they were dying before our very eyes. Why? Because of acid precipitation, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, all these cancers in the sky coming down. And so I vowed I was going to do something about it. I was an instant success. I went to Washington. It only took me 8 years. But on November 15th, 1990, George Herbert Walker Bush, 41 as we affectionately call him, signed into law the legislation, the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, launching the nation's war on acid rain. Prior to that, we did nothing in the federal government. Canada was way ahead of us. They were doing something, we were doing nothing. So what I'm suggesting is, we're not short of issues demanding our attention, and we're not short of high priority issues. I mean, if I can name them off, so can you. War in Iraq, terrorism, healthcare delivery, education. We've got a whole bunch of things. But when we start hearing in large numbers from the people back home, and contrary to the popular skeptic approach, we really do pay attention to what we hear from back home. When people start writing in and about global warming, just I went to the movie and saw this picture of Al Gore. I don't like him, but boy, this movie, he's right on target. Or I was at the local college and they had a visiting lecture and he talked about global climate change and the implication. Or I pick up my daily newspaper, not just the trade journals, but the daily newspaper, and there are articles. That helps prioritize something for us. I always tell my constituents, if it's important to you, it's important to me. That's more than the slogan. But if they express the view that this is important to them in large numbers, boy, you damn well better be important to me, or I won't be there very long.
But this does get at the one of the points that we were talking about earlier, and that is whether or not Congress has the capacity to address an issue before it becomes a crisis. And you have been relentless in trying to get Congress, the House, to pass a law that would require automakers to make more fuel-efficient cars. You have been pushing
Cafe
and
standards.
pushing and pushing for that without success, as the others. There
But
are a
we're
few
getting
others.
closer.
But tell us, give us the inside story there. What is the dynamic there that keeps something that seems fairly obvious, that if we used less oil, we'd be less dependent on oil, it would be certainly helpful to the emissions in the air and so forth. Why is it, what is the dynamic in that particular case? What goes on behind the
Special
scenes?
interest in misinformation. Let me tell you why. We consume, the American people, 21 million barrels of oil a day. We import 14 of those 21 million barrels. We are dependent to fuel our economy disproportionately dependent on foreign source oil. So you can get a bunch of people getting together in some city in the Middle East and decide to turn off the spigot, and boy, does that have a devastating impact on the economy. So, and everybody wants to search for new sources of oil. I mean, that's an easy one. Oh, you got to more research new sources of oil. But that's not the only solution, and in some instances, for example, Anwar, it's the wrong solution. So there's another way you can save, and that's by conservation. How do you do that? Well, you make more fuel-efficient vehicles that get more miles to the gallon. Guess who fights me every step of the way? The auto industry. It's a knee-jerk reaction. The auto industry said, we don't want government mandates telling us we have to do something. Business in general, and I understand this, business in general doesn't want to have government mandate anything on them. But I remind these auto industries that, look, at the big three used to be the big three, but now Toyota has surpassed Chrysler, and then it's surpassed Ford, and it's going to overtake General Motors very soon. It's going to be the number one automaker in the world. You look at figures month after month after month, and you find Toyota, Honda, and Hyundai up double digits, 12% increase in sales, 13%. Month after month after month, GM, Ford, Chrysler, down. Now, what's the dynamics in the market? What are Honda and the other foreign manufacturers, although some of them now have domestic facilities, what are they selling? They're selling style. Everybody sells style. You're going to make a big investment, you want something that you're comfortable in, it looks good, but they're also selling fuel efficiency. What are Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler selling? They're selling style. You got to sell style. They're selling power. The biggest advance in automotive mechanics over the last 25 years is to lower the time to go from 0 to 60 from 14.4 seconds to 9.9 seconds. And that's what they're selling, power. They're reluctantly coming around and now starting to sell fuel efficiency. All right, so you got the auto industry against you. Then you've got the United Auto Workers, and they're pretty darn influential. And they make the big argument that if you force CAFE standards on the auto industry, that it's going to cost us thousands of jobs. I never could understand that convoluted logic. I said, wait a minute. UAW makes all these automobiles, and if you make them more fuel efficient, then fewer are going to be sold. That doesn't wash. But those two dynamics are involved. Then you've got people trying to argue, well, they're not going to be a shill for the auto industry or for the UAW, so they come up with a different argument. And I remember one time in the closing session, it was in the 108th Congress, I had my CAFE amendment on the floor, and the closing argument, I knew instinctively that I won the debate on merit, but I was going to lose the vote, because here's what my opponent said in his closing statement. If the Boehlert Amendment is passed, our nation's highways will be strewn with thousands of dead bodies. Because the only way you can make vehicles more fuel efficient is to make them lighter and therefore less safe. Well, he was operating with 1970 technology. We've got all testimony and evidence from distinguished scientists and people who know about auto manufacturing that point out that you don't have to sacrifice weight to get fuel efficiency. You've got to make some design changes, and it might end up costing you several $100, maybe $1,000 more for the vehicle. But guess what? You'd save that at today's price of gasoline in no time at all. So it's the old way of thinking, and people just get so set. And so you get the amendment on the floor. The first time I had it on the floor was the 107th Congress. I got 160 votes. 108th Congress, I came back again, I got 162. 109th Congress, at the beginning, I came back again, I got 177. So we're making some progress. Then
But you're leaving.
another energy bill came on the floor later in the Congress. And I went to the Rules Committee. I'd been before the Rules Committee and asked for my amendment to be made in order, which they have to sanction. And then your amendment is made in order, and you have the debate, and you get a vote. And I had every reason to expect that they were going to allow my amendment to be made in order. This time they said no. Why? I've got a theory. Here's my theory. They did an informal whip check, and they discovered that my amendment had a chance of pass. Now, wait a minute. It got only 177 votes, more than before, at the beginning of the Congress, and later on in the Congress. Why would it then pass? What happened in the interim? What happened in the interim was Katrina and $3 a gallon gasoline. And all over America, people were writing their congressmen, do something about the gas prices. Well, you can't drill in every corner in America and find oil. The only way you can do something is if you impact the price by conserving and therefore lower the demand for the product. And that's the story of CAFE. And so hope springs eternal. I am convinced that our next Congress, whoever will take up the cudgel and advocate for increased CAFE standards, it will pass because it's a win-win situation. It's a national security interest to lessen our dependence on foreign source oil. Consumers all over America are sick and tired of driving to the corner gas station, filling up, and getting shocked. 50, 60 bucks to fill up a car with a tank of gas. So everybody wins if we do that.